Tonight, for me, for some of you, it's afternoon. For others, it is morning. We have with us Jonathan Kutab, who is a Palestinian human rights lawyer and activist. Jonathan was the lead of the Palestinian Legal Committee during the Israel PLO negotiations for the Cairo Agreement that led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority, I must say, many moons ago. For me, Jonathan is not a stranger. We've known each other, I think, for about 5 years. And for me, Jonathan, and I say this with great honesty, Jonathan is a friend and a challenge. And I think that challenges are healthy. Jonathan had the courage and the sincerity to say to me when we first met things that other people might not say, challenging me to think about who I was and what I believe. And I think I took up the challenge, and I'm still taking it up, thinking and rethinking who are the Palestinians in my eyes and who am I in my eyes, and what we have to do to respect each other, live together, and grant each other the dignity of a life of human rights and legitimacy. I've met Jonathan quite a few times at conferences and just for coffee since we first met, and he continues to challenge me. And I think that's the best way that it could be. So Jonathan, thank you personally, what you've done for me and what you're doing for the Palestinian people, and what I think that in doing for the Palestinian people, you're also doing for the Israeli people and for the Jewish people. Before we begin with our presentation, Jonathan's presentation, I'm just going to remind those who don't know who I am and what Roots is. So my name is Hanan Schlesinger. I'm a rabbi. I'm one of the founders of Roots Shorshim Judur many years ago, 6.5 years ago. And Roots is the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. Roots works in the heart of the conflict, in the Palestinian territories, in Palestine, in what I call Judea and Samaria. And here in Judea and Samaria, in the Palestinian territories, we endeavor to build human bridges of acceptance, recognition, partnership, trust, and empathy between the two peoples who live side by side, but so separate one from the other. Through face-to-face meetings and joint programs, we try to begin healing what I often call the hubris of exclusivity, a disease that leads both sides to deny the existence, the narrative, and legitimacy of the other side. We in Roots believe that we are laying the human groundwork that is necessary for a political solution that will bring peace and justice to this tiny strip of land that both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, call home. 2 or 3 additional matters of housekeeping. I welcome everyone to go to the website of Roots. It's friendsofroots.net. Friendsofroots.net. There's a lot there that one can learn, whether it's written text or whether it's videos and pictures. Friendsofroots.net. I also suggest everyone to get to know our Facebook page, to give us a like there, Friends of Roots on Facebook. And lastly, last matter of housekeeping, I will remind everyone that next week, our speaker is Huda Abu Akub. I'll say it again, Abu Akub, who is a Palestinian woman from Hebron, the city of Hebron. She is the regional director of ALMEP, the Alliance for Middle East Peace, and she's a personal friend of mine and a partner with us in Roots. She's also a leader of Women Waging Peace. And she's going to talk next week, Palestinian Women, Voices of Empathy and Pain. Again, Palestinian Women, Voices of Empathy and Pain. So with that, we'll have Jonathan speak. And after he speaks, there'll be ample time for questions and answers through the chat. And perhaps also we'll allow questions directly to Jonathan orally. So Jonathan, thank you for being with us here tonight. I have to unmute you, I guess. It's not working. Now it's good.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is always difficult and problematic to hold these types of conversations because I'm not sure always who my audience is, what their level of knowledge and information is. I try to be honest and straightforward. Whatever I say to you, I am willing to say not only in English, but in Arabic and in Hebrew, not only to a group who is interested in peace, but to a group who is hostile to peace, to regular Israelis, to settlers, to outsiders, to Christians, to Muslims. I say the same thing. Although it does help to know who your audience is, so as not to waste a lot of time and effort and speaking about things that may not be necessary. I think what I would like to speak about today must start with a historical perspective that deals with both Zionism and Palestinian Arab nationalism. While fully saying they are not symmetrical, they are not equal, they are not the same at all, at any level. But they do share some similarities. These two movements, these two ideologies, these two ideas, these two constructs, with their own particular narratives and their own particular view of history, at rock bottom are mutually exclusive. They cannot both be right, they cannot both work, they cannot both win. Each of them either ignores or worse, fights, attacks, delegitimizes, dehumanizes, demonizes the other. And it's natural, because if you believe in Zionism, you believe in creating a Jewish state. A state as Jewish as France is French. Whether you do it because God gave you this land, because historically you had a state here a couple of thousand years ago, necessity because of anti-Semitism and hatred in the world towards you, you need it, power, whatever. You believe the state should be Jewish. It's for the Jews. It's intended for the Jews. Its primary function is to serve the Jews. It has to be Jewish-centric. Domination of Jews, if not to the exclusion, certainly to the diminution of anything else. So if your state is going to be Jewish, a Palestinian Arab like me, I can be a pacifist, I can be a nice guy, I can be whatever. I'm a problem, especially if I believe that this is my land too. So this is Zionism. On the other side, Palestinian nationalism tells you Palestine Arabiya. Palestine is Arab. It's part of the Arab world. It's our patrimony. We've been living here for centuries or thousands of years. This is part of the Arab world. This Zionist movement is a function of imperialism, colonialism. It's a settler colonial movement. They're coming from all over the world. They want to create something that doesn't exist, and they want to do it in my land at my expense. They're not just refugees like the Syrian refugees going to Europe. These are people saying, this is ours. It belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. So if I view Zionism in that fashion, it's a problem for me, because Palestine is Arab. It's not Jewish. Yes, there are Jews there. There've been Jewish Arabs for forever. They speak Arabic. They dress. They eat. The music. They're Arabs. They're just of the Jewish religion, of the Jewish ethnicity, of the Jewish race, if you want to call themselves a race. But this place is Arab. So Palestinian nationalism and Zionism have been fighting for at least 1 century now. And the fight has been based on mutual exclusivity. Each one views the other as a total, not just a temporary enemy, but a challenge to its very existence. So it's natural that Palestinians rejected Zionism and rejected the partition resolution and rejected the legitimacy of, they even use the word quotation marks when they use Israel, because for them it's not a legitimate entity. And for the same reason also, Zionists don't want to use the word Palestinian. For many times they say Arabs, we're Arabs, we don't even belong here. To use the P word was forbidden for many, many years. Even when there were negotiations between Israel and the Arabs, they would not talk to the Palestinians. They wanted an Arab delegation. They wanted to subsume us within Egypt or Jordan. Somebody else has to speak for us. We didn't exist for them. We were a problem. Now, 1967, something major happened. The state of Israel, which has been created as a Jewish state, captured the rest of Palestine, Israel, whatever you call it, the Holy Land, and realized that they cannot really keep all of that. Even though they still believed it's theirs, God gave it to them, they deserved it, they won it in war, whatever. International legitimacy did not accept that. Whatever legitimacy Israel had as a state in 1948 did not extend to the occupied territories. Even Israel's own high court did not treat the territories as Israel. They treated it as hashtachim, the areas, the administered areas, the occupied areas, belligerent occupation, whatever. It really was not the same. Nobody treated it as the same. Nobody. There were a very small minority of people who were saying, hey, this is ours. This is as much ours as Tel Aviv is. In fact, Hebron and Jerusalem are more important to us religiously, historically, whatever reason, than Haifa. Who cares about Haifa and Ashkelon? And this is, if Zionism is true at all, then this is ours. If this is not ours, then that's not ours either. So yeah, there have been those people who spoke in that language, but the bulk of the world thought this is an opportunity to reinstate the idea of two separate states of partition. Since you can't have a Jewish state in all of Israel, Palestine, and you can't have an Arab state in all of Palestine, maybe this is the time when history, accident, has created the opportunity for a two-state solution. It was a pragmatic compromise. It was not there was no principle to it. It was just a pragmatic way of dealing with a reality that these two movements needed to deal with, and the rest of the world needed to deal with. Because a lot of people says, yeah, I support, the Jewish people that went through all this and that, and they have important connections to the land, but I also support the Palestinians. They need also a state and a homeland of their own, and you can't just please both sides. So maybe if we take this land, the occupied territories, and you can have a huge, wonderful compromise called the two-state solution. And it took the Palestinians a long time to accept it, and the Arabs. But eventually they did. A majority of people on both sides accepted the two-state solution as the only realistic way to deal with this conflict. There was one problem with it, though. The fly in the ointment was obviously the settlers and the settlements. Yeah, Rabbi is waving his hand. Because you can't have an Arab state on 22% of Palestine and still have Jewish settlements all over. There were also those who said, maybe we can have our cake and eat it too. Maybe we can have all this land without the people of the land. We managed to get rid of a lot of them in 1948, whether it's through a miracle or through panic or butt of a gun. Either way, they left, and we have never allowed them back, and we won't allow them back, period. But what do we do with the ones who are there now? Well, we can sort of rule them. But if they don't want to be ruled, well, they have to be ruled. But they will still be within our sphere of control and influence. For 50 years, this paradigm of occupied or not occupied, annexed, not annexed, it belongs to us, it doesn't belong to us, Palestinians are a people, they're not a people. These types of conversations went on and on and on until we arrived today at a situation where the egg has been scrambled so much, it really cannot be unscrambled. There's now, depending on who you listen to and how you count it, about 750,000 Jews living in the area that was occupied in 1967. And I'm including East Jerusalem, by the way, in case you're wondering. There's 750 Jews living there. And for them, this is home. This is not just a temporary bargaining chip to be used. This is not because security requires that we have bases there. This is because we think it's ours. God gave it to us, history, religion, whatever. And the Palestinians also said, wait a minute. Yes, I live in Ramallah, but I really come from Jaffa. And I really care about all the other Palestinians who can't even come to Ramallah, much less back to Jaffa and the Galilee. So these two movements, Zionism and Palestinian nationalism, came to a point where they each recognize, I hope, that they can't get rid of the other at all. They must live with the other. I can say that clearly about Palestinians. The vast majority of them have come to that realization. I'm not sure I can say that about all Israelis. After all, they have been powerful and they have been successful. They have captured all the land. They do now control all of the land. They make the laws. They have the power. They have the military, economic, technological, organizational, systematic structures to really keep it all. They do. They control all entry in and out of it. But in their view, they haven't given up the idea of dominance, privilege, and priority. It is theirs in a way that it is not mine. It is theirs because it's a Jewish state. Now, in the occupied territories, that becomes very blatant, because there, the Jewish settlements don't even allow Israeli Arab citizens to live. They are Jewish, truly and fully and completely Jewish. But they are also privileged to have all the privileges of Israel and Israeli citizenship. Their health system is Kupat Halim, not the Palestinian system. Their educational system is Israeli. Their customs and duties and services and water and land and security, they are a privileged group. And they live under Israeli law, not under military rules and military occupation. And they have no interest in living as equals with the Palestinians in that area. They want to live as Israelis. They want to vote in the Knesset, thank you very much. They want to enjoy the standard of living, which is at a minimum 10 times higher than the standard of living of the West Bank Palestinians. They want the privilege, therefore they don't want the equality. Now, this is by way of introduction. And what I meant by this introduction is to say that we are at a point of crisis. And the crisis comes from the fact that the two-state solution is no longer possible. It cannot be implemented. Even if Israeli government wanted to implement it, it would not be able to do so. It is not going to remove 750,000 Jewish settlers. No, it's not. It's not going to happen. It's not going to convince them either to accept anything less than full Israeli rights and privileges that they have now. They're not willing to compromise it. And the Palestinians are saying, wait a minute, if this two-state solution, if what they're going to give us, especially after Trump and Netanyahu, they will call it a state, but it's not going to be a state. It's not going to be sovereign. It's not going to have power. It's not going to have control. It's going to be just they may call it a state, but it won't be a state. So is this what we want? Is this what Palestinian nationalism wants? Is statehood the object? And I will also ask, is Jewish statehood the object for Israelis? I came up talking with other friends with a new, I would call it experiment, at least a thought experiment. I once asked a rabbi, why do you want a Jewish state? And tried to see why is it that Jews want a Jewish state. And I also asked myself and other Palestinians, why is it that we want a state? And I listed the reasons why we want a state and the reason why you want a Jewish state. And I found something very strange, that maybe, just maybe, we can get all these things that we want from a state without having a state. Let me start with the Palestinians. Why do I want a state? I want a passport. Why do I want a passport? So I can travel. But if you give me a state and I can't travel because somebody else controls my borders, what does that passport do for me? I want an airport. If I have an airport, but I can't fly in and out without getting permission from the Israelis, what do I want an airport? I want a parliament. If I have a parliament and a legislative council, but I can't pass the laws that I like, why do I want a state? I want a state because it's supposed to provide me with some things. And if you give me something and you call it a state that doesn't provide these things, doesn't happen. If you give me some other entity that provides me with those things, but not on an exclusive basis, maybe I'll take it. You want a Jewish state. Why do you want a Jewish state? Well, one rabbi told me, I want a place where any Jew, anywhere, no questions asked, can come and be able to defend himself. That's why I want a Jewish state. I said, well, maybe I'll give you something better. How about a place where any Jew, anywhere, anytime, no questions asked, can come and doesn't need to defend himself because nobody is out to kill him? What is it about a state that is so good, so important? And can I give it to you on a non-exclusivist basis? Can we envision a new reality which provides each community what it needs, but not exclusivity, that does not exclude the other entirely, that allows both to have it? Well, you tell me, for that, Zionism will have to stop being Zionism. and Palestinian nationalism will have to stop being Palestinian nationalism. The element of exclusivity can be taken out and still provide all the elements of identity, affiliation, security that come with, that we usually associate with statehood, except for exclusivity. So I started working on this project. And I started listing the elements. And I started seeing how can we have a new vision that addresses both communities at their deepest level. Because under the current paradigm, the more you get, the less I get. The happier I am, the sadder you are. If I have more land, you have less land. If you have more immigrants, you shift the demographic balance and hurt me. And if I have more babies, I shift the demographic balance and I hurt you. Okay. Can we come up with a solution that is not subject to this, what I call the demographic demon? Can I provide you with, and me with, sufficient rights and guarantees and assurances that do not shift or change when demography changes? Can I allow you the right of return, which doesn't in any way change the nature of the state? And can you allow me the right of return without changing the nature of the state? That state has to be both Jewish and Arab, both Israeli and Palestinian. At that time, whether you call it Israel or Palestine, we'll have to talk about that. But that's not what's important. What is important is that I address your need for a right of return and my need for a right of return, your need for Jewish life and my need for Arab life, your need for a Jewish calendar and my need for a Muslim and Christian and even secular calendar. A state where the constitutional framework satisfies you and satisfies me. Now that means on some issues, you will be given an advantage. Now I'll mention one of them right off the bat, defense. I think, in my vision, that for constitutionally, the top 5 positions, head of the Air Force, Navy, Army, and nuclear administration, will always be Jewish by law, by constitutional law. The head of the police, however, has to be an Arab, always, by constitutional law. Their deputy has to be from the other side, and all other positions in the army have to be on the basis of merit. Now, you see, there's another reason where I think security is important to you and has to be built into the new vision. 10% of the defense budget has to go into a special ministry. I call it the Ministry of Tolerance and Cooperation, that helps teach each community about the other community, and that helps support joint projects. Because the biggest threat to your security as a Jewish Zionist in Palestine today doesn't come from Iran and cannot be improved by more F-39s or a new ballistic system. The biggest threat to you comes from a Palestinian schoolgirl who has a pair of scissors in her pocket. How do you address that? You address that by creating 10% of your defense budget should go towards really making peace, because peace is what gives you security. So yes, you will have control over the army, the top echelons, but you will also have a ministry that works to remove the causes of hatred and animosity. You need to have access to live anywhere in all the land, but so do I. I need access to live anywhere in the whole land. For me, just as security is central for more Israelis, for me, equality is central. I need to have genuine and full and complete equality in the public sphere. In the public sphere. Except for these issues, which, as I said, like the law of return and defense, etc., where there is a specific provision. So it means that I need to be represented in the structure of the government, regardless of whether I'm in the majority or in the minority. You see, if you look at history, you will find out that democracy doesn't mean that 51% can trample the rights of the minority. That's not democracy. This is what many people think. You know, you have 50%, you can say forget Arabs, and when we become 51%, you say forget Jews. No, you cannot. South Africa has showed us that you can have a minority numerically, which is still very powerful, in fact, dominant in certain fields. Because what gives you power is not just your numbers. Yes, your numbers is a factor, but there are other factors also that are involved in the structure and the fabric of every country. You cannot always assume that a person will vote only for their people and for their party. I think if we have a genuinely democratic state, I may get some of your votes. And I'll certainly rather vote for somebody like you than I would for some Arab bigot. So it is possible to think of a new reality that accepts both sides and that gives both sides what they want out of a statehood. The one thing that my vision cannot give is exclusivity. The one thing that I will not accept is when I say, this is mine and I don't want you. And I won't accept you saying, this is mine and I won't accept you. It also means there has to be legal structures. Let's take family law. Right now, we have a crazy situation in Israel. It was based on the Ottoman millet system. Actually, I think it's more discriminatory against Jews than it is against Arabs, and I'll tell you why. Because part of the compromise that Ben Gurion made with the Palestinian Jews who were living here, who were all Orthodox Jews, by the way, he says, look, I'll give Orthodox Jews a monopoly in personal status matters. So Reform and conservative Jews don't have these rights. To the extent that your weddings, marriage, divorce, inheritance is to be governed by religious law, it's the religious law, if you're Jewish, of the Orthodox community, not the Reform, not the conservative. If you're a Muslim, it's Sharia law. If you're a Christian, you have a problem because Christians have so many different denominations. 11 of them are recognized by the State of Israel. 11. And they each have their own ecclesiastical courts. But if you happen to belong to a community that is not one of the recognized communities, or if you happen to be secular, you have a problem. You really have no personal religious freedom in Israel today, because it's built on the Ottoman millet system, where you belong to a certain millet. And if your millet, your religious ethnic community, happens to be Jewish, it means you're under the control of those Orthodox rabbis, even if you don't believe in God, even if you're totally secular, or even if you're conservative or Reform. And if I happen to be from the Greek Orthodox millet, that's who controls me, even if though I hate the patriarch. I think he's an utter a moral catastrophe and and a religious pagan. But I belong to that community. And if I want to be a Baptist, too bad. You can be a Baptist between you and God. But in terms of your wedding, in terms of registration, in terms of birth, in terms of inheritance, personal status matters in Israel are ruled by religious law of the community to which you belong, whether you like it or not. In my vision, you'd have that choice. You can choose to belong to that community, and you can choose to follow civil law if you wish. So that's part of my vision, is to try and give more religious freedom to the population. Part of my vision also is to have what's called supermajorities. The Constitution cannot be altered by a mere 51%. Yes, we would have democracy, yes, we would have elections, but they would have no power to change the constitutional framework, which is what guarantees the rights of the minorities, which guarantees the nature of the state forever. You can only change those by a very high. You'd have to have a constitutional court of 5 judges, at least 2 Arabs, at least 2 Jews, and all decisions have to be by 4 votes out of 5. I'm a lawyer. I come up with these constructs. The idea is people have the wrong idea of what democracy means. We must have an idea of democracy that's not based on the dictatorship of 51%. It should be a framework that gives real power, real freedom to communities as well as to individuals, rather than to 51% who can do whatever they want. So we have to rethink what we mean by democracy. We have to rethink what we mean by Zionism and Palestinian nationalism. And we have to build a new future together. It will be very different. Somebody said it would be shocking, it would be a beacon for all the nations. Absolutely. It would really be a beacon for all the nations in the area as well as throughout the world. After all, Jews want to be a light unto the nations. And somebody like me is very critical of everything that's happening in all the Arab world. They need new models that are not based on chauvinism, that assert your identity. I mean, I am proud of my identity as a Palestinian Arab, but I don't have to have an identity that is the worst common denominator among Palestinians. There are a lot of things in Palestinian society that I do not like and that need to be fought against. I do not want to force people in Palestinian society who choose not to live by its strictures, to live by very conservative mores of the Palestinian Arab majority. I want a state that guarantees their rights, even if they don't follow the interests of the majority. Now, this is really a conversation, and I just wanted to open it up now for questioning, but before I did, I wanted to really lay out the central element of this vision. The central element is that ideologies very often lose sight of who they're supposed to serve. Ordinary people will follow a particular ideology or leader or party because they think they will get them somewhere. But I think I can get them there with all the positive elements of their ideologies, but not the negative ones. And for me, there is no question that exclusivity is a negative element. for us as Palestinians, as well as for Jewish Israelis. Once we accept that, and we're willing to share without in any way giving up our views, our identity, our interests, then maybe we can come up with a vision that commends itself to us, to our enemies, neighbors, as well as to many people throughout the world. Okay, I will stop now and I'll see somebody has some comment already.
So, Jonathan, I want to kind of summarize and make sure that I personally understood. I think you didn't use the words, but you're suggesting a one-state solution, which is a binational state, a Jewish Zionist / Palestinian Arab state, in which there are constitutional guarantees that provide to each community the essential elements of its national identity. Is that an acceptable summary?
Fair enough, yes.
So then the first question I would ask is, people have been talking about a binational state for a long time. What is the new element that you're suggesting? That's what is the what's going to break the deadlock that we've been
There are a number of new elements, but before I give them, I want to address this person who says, how do you get there? How do you convince Bibi, settlers, extremists, Hamas, etc., of these things? And I want to say, I want to address that. I don't want to escape from it, but I want to say that it's a separate issue. Having a vision that people can buy into and that people can accept is one thing. Working towards it, you have a number of obstacles. And there are obstacles that have to be overcome. One of them is the tremendous imbalance in power. Why should somebody who has all the power share it? Why? Another obstacle that we have to deal with is what I call the Holocaust syndrome. The fact that the Jewish people have gone through a traumatic experience of monumental nature that makes it very difficult for them to accept or even to consider the best ideas in the world, because they're always afraid that behind it there is some kind of trick or some kind of plan, or that we can never really trust anybody else. We can only rely on ourselves, and we have to be not only powerful and dominant, but triple dominant, and we have to aggressively pursue our rights, otherwise we'll be annihilated again. The trauma of the Holocaust needs to be addressed and healed before any solution. 2-state, 1-state, no state can even be considered. It's an obstacle that needs to be. Right now, that syndrome is so powerful that even when you act totally non-violently, you're still viewed as an existential threat. BDS, for example, is viewed as threat number one because it undermines, delegitimizes us. So people, wait, BDS is non-violent. We're talking about non-violence, but still, most Israelis today view BDS as scary as Iran. So yes, there are a lot of obstacles that need to be addressed before we reach the vision of peace. But I wanted first to address, can we come up with a vision that really addresses the needs of both sides? What's new about my particular thought experiment, I guess, is how I try to deal with Israel's security fears. And how I try to deal with what I call the demographic demon. to make numbers no longer an obstacle, to create a structure where most Israelis reject the secular democratic state because they think Arabs have a higher birth rate. And one day, surely, the right of return for the same reason. You reject it because you think once Arabs have a majority, they will treat us the way we're treating them now. Through the magic of democracy, they will be able to do to us what we are doing to them. So I try to reassure them that numbers alone do not translate into power, and being a minority does not mean you are necessarily marginalized. In fact, in many societies, minorities are powerful, even dominant in certain fields. And the United States is a perfect example where the Jewish minority, if you want to call them that, are extremely powerful, way beyond their numbers. And where the Muslim minority of almost equal numbers has zero power. So it's not just numbers. There are a number of factors that go into a working democracy, not just, so I try to address the demographic demon, I call it, as well as the security needs of Israel, and try to also deal with the fact that the two-state solution has really failed. Has really failed because it was only pragmatic. It did not at all try to create a legitimate moral constituency. It was all of, what can we do? We have to give something up. So then it becomes a zero-sum solution. What I give up, they gain. What they gain, I lose. So we continue to be at each other's throats. You want more territory and we want less, to give you less. We want all of the West Bank, and you say, no, we have to take portions of it because they're important to us. And we say, well, what about, the other side? We have some rights there. No. This is ours. We're just talking about your part, how we divide it best between us and you. So the two-state solution has a built-in system for continued conflict. I'm trying to create a system that addresses the basic needs and allows us to work together without losing our identity and moving forward.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do you want me to read the questions to you, or are you going to just look at them?
There's few enough that somebody can read it themselves, or he can read them.
So I guess the first question here looks like it's from Ruth. How would you deal with land ownership and control if the current situation is the departure point?
Okay, very good one. Very good one. Under the Zionist paradigm, the land belongs to the Jews. God gave it to them. So everybody collectively owns the land. Some references to the year of the Jubilee. That land is only leased 49 years or 99 years, but ultimately the raqabah, the ownership of the land, remains for the whole Jewish people. I say no. Some Muslims talk about all of Palestine is a Muslim waqf, belongs to God. No, belongs to the people who are there. Now, under my vision, nobody will be displaced from the homes, the lands that they live in. However, there has to be some measure of reparations, some measure of restitution to people who lost their property and their land. That can either come from the general treasury or to be given alternative public land for them to use and develop. Because what happened to the Palestinians is an injustice, and you must address it. And if you don't address the injustice, you keep the hatred going. Now, I know you're not going to have absolute justice. I know it's a lengthy process and you'll only be getting a limited response. But the fact that you are getting a response, that you are being allowed to get alternative lands from public land to build on, that you are given some measure of compensation, if not full compensation, will go a long way to dealing with the feeling of injustice and hatred that you have. Even in South Africa, Tanzania, and other places, they have tried, but not very successfully, to deal with this. How do you deal with the injustice? For centuries, this land was taken from black farmers and now is owned by whites. What do? You have to compensate them either with money or give them alternative lands or some kind of program that addresses their needs. You need to reintroduce them, reintegrate them into the structures of the state as well as of the industry that they've been excluded from for a long time. You need to train them. You need to allow them to go into the aircraft industry, into a whole number of industries where they have been systematically kept out of. So you need to have programs that address these things. Again, the goal is not absolute justice, but at least a measure of affirmative action that tries to deal with it.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have a question from Jenny, who writes, if both groups have the right to return, will there be room for all who might come?
Yes, ma'am, there will be. But even apart from that, Jews believe they have the right of return. Not all Jews returned, but all Jews want the right to return. In my view, most Palestinians would not want to return, but all Palestinians want the right to return. As long as I'm denied that right, illegally and illegitimately, I feel very, very frustrated. But if I am allowed that right, most Palestinians would be saying, fine, just give me a little compensation, allow me to set up business in Jordan, and I'm quite fine in Amman. Quite fine. In fact, I'm quite fine in America. It's a wonderful place. But I want the right to return. I don't want my nephew to be stopped at the airport, turned back, where he cannot attend a wedding because he's Arab. I want the right to say, this is where I come from, this is my homeland, this is my connection. I think this is the kind of question that reveals more either the fears or the desire to exclude the other. Because when people talked about the Jewish right of return, they did not ask, can this tiny piece of land absorb all the Jews in the world? What was important was that was available for any Jew who wished, or any Jew who was persecuted, or any Jew who wanted, he can go because it's his land. And he can feel connected to it. I think the vast majority of Palestinians will feel the exact same way. We want the right to return. How many of us will actually come? I don't know. But yes, the land can absorb a lot more people.
We have a question from Bob DeBrow. It's hard to imagine any of the members of the Palestinian or Israeli leadership willing to even explore any new ideas that you're willing to discuss. Even harder to imagine the communities of Gaza and leadership there being willing to sit down and talk about anything. Has there ever been such a discussion outside of an academic meeting or discussion such as we're having today? And what would need to happen to get the leadership to change their positions to even be willing to sit down again?
Okay. There's two questions here. Are the leaders willing to think about these things? And two, are they willing to negotiate about these things and sit down? I think the leaders of both sides, unfortunately, have been horrible. I'll speak about my leaders. They've been horrible. They have not had anything new creative, I mean, all the good ideas in the Palestinian community came from civil society. Arafat had to be sit down and fed, spoon-fed, what he needed to say and do to get involved in the negotiations. Your leaders also, from the other side, because they have power. They say, we have power, we can do it. Why should we sit down? Why should we negotiate? We can do it all without. We can have it all without doing it. So the leaders are a problem. The negotiations themselves are also a problem. Because if there's anything that I really bothers me about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, is how peace has been given a bad name. The word peace today is a negative one, at least in the Palestinian community, because it suggests humiliation, capitulation, defeat, acceptance of totally immoral conditions only to gain a little bit benefit individually. So people will tell you, I'm not for peace. Why should, I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it, not because I don't believe in peace, but because peace has been given a bad name. You now have this kind of deal between the UAE and Trump and Netanyahu. And I am angry for one reason, because it forces me to say I am against it. When in fact, I'm in favor of anything that brings people together. But this, no, I don't want it. I will fight it. I am against it because it's not real, genuine peace. I remember one lady explained to me, why is it that radical feminists don't want you to open the door for them? Why? Because that is being offered as an alternative to genuine equality. I'll be very nice to you. I'll open the door for you. No, I don't want you to open the door for me. I can open the door for myself. What I do want is equal pay. What I do want is equality. What I do want is respect. Opening the door for me becomes almost a negative. So I look at it this way. You are now literally sitting with your knee on my neck and say, why don't we come and talk? Why don't we sit down and negotiate? I don't want to sit down and talk with your knee on my neck. Why should we? I want justice. I want freedom. And yes, I recognize that to get there, we need to sit and we need to talk and we need to understand each other. Yes. But I don't want talks to be an alternative or a substitute for genuine equality and freedom and rights. I don't know, does that answer your question, Robert?
You're muted, Bob.
It's a complicated question. You can leave out the second part.
Okay. The second part I had to say because I have to be honest. When the rabbi called me and I said, well, what do you want to talk about? What do you want me to talk about? He said, talk about yourself. Let people see you and appreciate you as a person, as a human being. And I didn't tell him that at the time, but I was really angry. I was really angry. You have your knee on my neck and you want me to tell you that I'm a human being? I don't want to tell you what kind of human being I am. Get your knee off my neck. So I didn't tell you that, Rabbi, but I promised your audience I'll be honest. But that's how I felt. That's how I felt. I felt we Palestinians are required to prove our humanity, to prove that we are worthy of equality. No, we are your equal. We are your equal. And we demand to be treated as equals. And until you get into that framework, it's hard. If you set up a structure for negotiations that has a built-in humiliation and bias and inequality, then you'll find many Palestinians say, I refuse to participate, even though I am dying to talk, I'm dying to negotiate. But on these terms, no, I will not negotiate.
Andrew asks if the things you've talked about are written in some type of document, a summary of your vision.
Yes, actually. I have two documents. One of them is like a 60-page document where I work out these ideas. I haven't published it yet. I'm thinking next week or the next couple of weeks, I may publish it. I have to find somebody to publish it for me. I've also summarized these ideas in a long article, like 3,200 pages. And I'm also trying to get that one published. And if I find a publisher, I think that's probably more what you want to see than the full document. So be on the lookout the next couple of weeks. I may be able to publish some of these things. Initially, I started working on these ideas with a Jewish person, but then I decided it should be probably just published by me rather than jointly as a Palestinian Arab. And I want to publish it in Arabic as well, because I believe in saying the exact same things to everybody. Yes, thank you. I think when it is published, I will send the link to the rabbi and he will share it with the rest of you.
With pleasure. We have here a question from Carol. How to deal with Torah. Israel is mentioned and taught in Sunday school as homeland.
Yeah. Well, I think that question is for you, Rabbi. I will tell you how I deal with Christian Zionists who use the same type of language, that God gave this land to the Jews, that's it's said in the Torah, I give this land to you and your descendants forever. Apart from the fact that Palestinians are also, Arabs are also descendants of Abraham, and apart from the fact that DNA is not very pure on either side, I only answer that as a Christian. And as a Christian, I believe that Jesus taught a different vision of the kingdom of God and the people of God. A vision that was not tribal and not territorial, but universal. God is the God, the Lord of the whole universe, not just of this small piece of land in the Middle East. God loves all people and not just one tribe. He chose that tribe for a purpose, for his purpose, not for privilege. Some rabbis would argue that he chose it for responsibility and even for pain and even for a burden. Am Sgula was not a privileged people, but a suffering people who had to bear the responsibility of bringing a message to the nations. And land was given to them not as a as a Christmas gift. You unwrap it and you eat it all up and don't give anybody else. Don't share it with anybody else. It was given as a tool for explaining who he was and what he wants people to act and how he wants people to act. As I said, the theological discussion is I should leave to the rabbi, because I only give a Christian answer. I don't give a Jewish answer. I understand, though, that many Jews for 2,000 years moved away from a territorial view of their scripture but maybe they're returning to it now. Who knows? That's, as I said, for wiser people than me.
Jonathan, I'm going to go to now George Douglas, who is a member of the board of American Friends of Roots, and he would like to ask his question directly orally. So please, George.
Please.
Can everyone hear me? Is this my microphone working?
Yes.
Great. Well, Jonathan, I'd like to ask you a question about the fundamental rights of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and I'll lay out four freedoms or rights, and I'd like to get your opinion on each. The first is the right of political expression. This is very similar to what we have in the United States. The second is the right of free assembly. The third is the right to criticize leaders without being in fear of physical harm or threats. And the fourth is the right to choose leaders. And I ask this question built around the axiom, and this relates to conflicts in general, not necessarily this conflict. It's built around the axiom that when leadership of both sides of a conflict is committed to peace and ending the conflict ends virtually 100% of the time. And when a conflict has persisted for decades, those conditions are generally not met. Okay. So these rights relate to moving a vision, like your vision, forward. And how do you feel about the denial of these rights to Palestinians, particularly more severely in Gaza than the West Bank? But there's clearly an issue here.
That is the easiest question I've ever been asked in my life. I am totally, fully, completely, unequivocally committed to all these freedoms that you mentioned. And I think that these freedoms have to be fought for in every country, in every generation, including in the United States, where supposedly they are guaranteed by the Constitution, but where they are under attack. Absolutely, I want those freedoms, and the vast majority of Palestinians believe and want those freedoms. However, our leaders, more often than not, use the conflict to avoid giving us those freedoms in the name of emergency. Today, Trump is even threatening to create a new emergency. He says, gives him certain powers, and he's talking about delaying the elections under emergency, because ideology tries to trump our personal rights and our personal freedoms. In my vision for a Palestinian-Israeli state, these rights have to be sacrosanct. They have to be defended by the Constitution, even against the majority. Even when there's a majority that wants to take away these rights, we have to defend those rights. So that's an easy one. But I disagree with you that somehow when these rights are respected, the result is peace. Not necessarily. Demagogues have been able to mobilize majorities in favor of fighting others. Lebanon and Israel. It used to be said that you can't have a war between two countries if both of them have McDonald's. That's what they used to say until Israel invaded Lebanon in '82. The fact that a majority is given the right to speak and even to criticize its leaders is always a good thing, I'd like to think that it guarantees peace, but I don't think it does. Because you can have a majority of Israeli Jews who want to keep Palestinians under control, who don't believe in giving them equality. And then the majority of Palestinians who feel they want to be free will have to fight. So majorities can in fact fight, but you're absolutely right. We need those rights. We need the freedom of assembly, freedom to criticize leaders, and freedom to depart from the majority. I think that should be guaranteed.
Jonathan, I'm going to put two questions together of Gershon and of Katya. Have you ever heard of Rudy Rochman, an Israeli activist? And as part of the same question, how large is your vision? Do people know about it? Israel and Palestine?
The first question, no, I don't know this gentleman, I'd like to get to know him. Number two, I don't have a large following. I haven't tried to establish a party or a leadership. I've been more of an academic, but I will tell you, in my ordinary talks to Palestinians, not just intellectuals, but ordinary people, the bus driver, the taxi driver, the neighbor that we visit, when I talk about these things, I find a tremendous hunger, a tremendous excitement. Oh, I wish that were possible. I wish that were possible. I suspect that Palestinians will have an easier time with my ideas than the average Israeli. Maybe because we're weaker. I don't know. I'm just trying to be honest. The idea of a secular democratic state used to be very much the prevalent idea among Palestinians. It was beaten out of us. We were told, if you use that word, secular democratic state, it means you want to destroy the state of Israel. It means you are involved in genocide. It means you're almost as bad as Hitler. You are not even allowed into the conversation. We had to be forced to accept the idea of partition and two-state solution because everybody told us that's the only thing that is acceptable, that will be allowed. So we were silenced when we talked about secular democratic state. It's only after that the two-state solution was really destroyed and undermined. Again, thanks to the settlers who made it no longer possible. It's only then that we had the space to begin discussion about a one state and what it would look like and what is required to get there. And how do Israelis fit in it? And how do the secular people fit in it? And how do the settlers fit in it? And how does Hamas fit in it? All of these people have to fit into this new vision. I think they can. I think they can. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to get there, but I'm saying at least on the theoretical and intellectual level, it's a much more realistic thing to talk about than it is to talk about a two-state solution.
Jonathan, so a question from Neil. Bibi and the settlers are as extreme as Hamas in many ways. How do we marginalize them and develop moderate constituencies on both sides? Perhaps one way to achieve that is to associate peace with massive economic development, a Marshall Plan for the West Bank, as opposed to capitulation and humiliation. And I'll add that Neil wrote, we have a word to describe Jonathan, he's a mensch. Thank you for sharing your creative ideas. I guess you know Yiddish, Jonathan.
Yes, I know a little. Yiddish was one of those languages that was also suppressed. Okay. There is something very appealing about that. The only problem is it's, again, like the concept of peace itself, it has often been co-opted. And co-opted by people who don't really want peace. They just want to pay you off. Or at least they want to dangle in front of you the possibility of financial benefit if you give up your rights. And most Palestinians, when you talk to them in that sense, they remember the story about the one who sold his birthright for a dish of pottage. Yes? The biblical reference to Esau. Eating some good, nice pottage when you're hungry as a way of giving up your birthright. So Palestinians say, yes, we welcome all these things, but what are you asking us to do? To access your $50 billion, we have to accept the Trump plan. We have to give up our integrity and our identity and our dreams of equality in order to make some more money. Is this what you are offering us? That's Labour Party, Shimon Peres type language. Feed them, feed their stomachs, and they'll forget about Palestine and about equality and about rights. But, you know, having said that, I will say Definitely. I think a good peaceful solution will create a peace dividend. And I think both the Palestinian people and the Israeli Jews have a lot of entrepreneurial skills and creativity and connections and access. You don't understand how much the dispersal of the Palestinian people has influenced and affected us as a people. We have had to live throughout the Gulf territories. We built the Gulf and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. We had to live in Europe and in the Arab world. We had to live with Israel and with Israelis. And that has influenced who we have become. We have become much more open, much more entrepreneurial. I'd like to think much more progressive, much more open to ideas of democracy and freedom and liberty and pluralism and tolerance than most of the peoples of the Middle East. So I think that's a very positive thing. I think we can have a good society.
Neil continues, is it possible that this conflict will not ever be resolved by the parties themselves? Perhaps we need to convene an international group to work out a final peace framework that will be completely binding and enforced by the rest of the world.
Well, okay, 3 answers. First, I wish we were left to ourselves to solve it. The problem is everybody else has interfered, and everybody else has usually been a negative influence. Israel doesn't act by itself. It acts with the US and with Europe and with others. Palestinians don't act by themselves. They need Egypt, they need Jordan, they need Lebanon, they need the countries they live under, they need Iran, they need the international community. I wish we were left by ourselves, but we're not. In fact, I wish especially that the US would leave us alone, but they won't. So the answer to question number 1, yes, we need to solve the problem. Question number 2, the international community can in fact play a positive role, both to guarantee the whatever arrangements we come up with and to set our minds at ease, both Israelis and Palestinians, that this is going to be allowed to exist, and to assure Israeli Jews as well as Palestinians that this formula that you have come up with, once you agree to it, that is going to be kept. We're not going to allow people to rock the boat. So yes, the international community can play a very positive role in this. Right now, it's just playing a very negative role and has not been helpful. What was the question again? There was a third point.
The question was, perhaps an international group has to be convened to work at a final peace framework that would be completely binding and enforced by the rest of the world.
Yes. The third point that I wanted to make was that sometimes, because the power balance is so huge, sometimes an international tribunal or an international framework or a reference to the United Nations or a set of outside powers can be helpful to address the power imbalance that exists. So yes, I think an international component can very well play a positive role.
We'll take time for one more point. Gilda, I'm not sure I understand exactly the question, but I'll read it, and if she wants to explain it further, then we can have that option. I heard you ask for certain rights on behalf of the Palestinians. I accept the validity of those rights. Tell me, however, what do the Palestinians bring to the table?
What do we bring to the table? We bring everything. We have the land and we have the people. And we bring the willingness to accept to share it with another group who initially we thought didn't really belong here, and who we initially thought were foreigners, outside settler colonialists who taken our land. We bring to the table acceptance, recognition, legitimization, friendship, and neighborly cooperation. I also think that we can bring the rest of the Arab and Muslim world with us. Bibi Netanyahu is trying to pick them up one at a time, say, see, we don't need you. We made peace with UAE without your interference. We don't need you. You don't bring anything to the table. No, we bring a lot to the table. The fact that some Arab leaders, against the wishes of the vast majority of their population, wants to make a deal with Israel, doesn't give Israel any legitimacy in the area, including in the UAE, by the way. It's the Palestinian cause is very close and dear to the hearts and minds of many throughout the Middle East, throughout the Arab world, throughout the Muslim world, and throughout much of the third world. And this is what we can bring to the table: acceptance within that framework, rather than being there by virtue of power and US military might.
Okay, I think we've reached close to the end of our hour and a half. I see from the comments that most of you, perhaps all of you, have been enlightened, have been challenged, have much to think about. Thank you, Jonathan, for serving in that capacity. I also have a lot to think about. I would like to, at the end, remind everyone that Roots itself is not political, which doesn't mean that we demean the importance of politics. We believe that, yes, there is great political injustice right now on the ground, and we have to find a political solution. Absolutely, Roots believes in that. A solution of equality and dignity and human rights for both sides. But at the same time, Roots doesn't support a particular vision. And that's why we've had on these Sunday programs a number of different speakers, including Jonathan, presenting different, even opposing visions. Roots wants to provide a framework to listen and to weigh these different positions. And that being the case, I would like to remind everyone that we've heard already in these Sunday presentations 2 early, or even 3 earlier very political presentations. They're all now on the Roots website, and you can go back and listen to them, perhaps to compare them and contrast them with what you've heard today. We had Yisrael Firkash from the Anachnu movement presenting his 2-state solution, his modified 2-state solution. That's on our website. We had Meron Rappaport and Thabit Abu Ras from the Land for All movement presenting their 2 states, 1 homeland approach. That's also important to go back and look at. And we had Emmanuel Shacha presenting his, let's say, Jewish understanding of the 1-state solution. So we have, in the framework of these Roots programs, 4 different approaches, all of them different with many similarities, which you're all welcome to look at, to go to the website and to compare and contrast and think again. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for all our listeners. And again, next week, we'll be listening to a woman's voice of empathy and pain from Palestine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Brother Anand.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Jonathan, do you have an email address that we can continue the dialogue?
Yes, jonathankutab@gmail.com. You can put it in the chat box, I suppose.
So that's Jonathan Kutab with 2 T's.
One word, yeah.
One word. Okay, excellent. I look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you so much.
Right. Bye.
Okay.